I'm going to kick it off with the first panel. Very glad that it's hosted by one of my absolutely most favorite people in Web3, Jose. Okay, Jose on Twitter, and he's joined by Andreea Magdalina from She Said So, Izzy O from Refraction DAO, Amir, aka Sirsu, from Black Hand, and the man like Elijah. I think that's about it. We are good to go. So please, friends, enjoy.
Awesome. Thanks for that setup, Mikhail. Excited to have this conversation with everyone here on culture, community, and capital. I just want to kick it off by thanking everyone who's here today and everyone who's watching. First thing, just to set things up, I'd love for everyone to introduce themselves, what organization they're here representing, then answer the question that I think we're really here to talk about, which is, do you think DAOs are overrated or underrated? I'm going to throw it to Andreea first.
Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Thank you, Mikhail, for the invitation. I'm really in amazing company right here. Some friends I know, some friends I'm about to make. So yeah, great to be here overall. So I am originally from Romania, and I'm the founder of She Said So, a global community of women, gender minorities, and allies in the music industry that's been around since 2014. And right now we're about 15,000 people, 15,000 members distributed across 20 global chapters. And we still operate in a Web2 way, but definitely exploring what our future looks like in the Web3 space, given the fact that we finally have all the tools that we need to properly operate as a community, as a collaborative community. So excited to chat more about that.
Andreea, DAOs, overrated or underrated? You have to answer.
It's a double-edged sword. Underrated. I would say underrated.
Cool. I'm gonna throw it to Sirsu next.
How you guys doing? I'm Sirsu. I'm a designer, anthropologist. I think a lot about agency and what we can do to create unique experiences for communities. I think as a designer, like our responsibility is to be sort of like a shepherd that has a unique set of tools, but also we are kind of a teacher and enabling other people to take those same tools and build things for themselves. But DAOs, I was trying to find a great segue within that and the two things, but I couldn't. But I feel like DAOs are, I think contextually, DAOs are underrated, but I think the way most people look at or interpret a DAO, I think is incredibly overrated. Like there's a lot of people that make DAOs for the sake of DAOs because of the word or the acronym, I suppose, and the fact that it's like a term that can be used to capture interest or, you know, at least when the bull market was going on, like, you know, a lot of VC money without actually really seeing the level of depth that cooperatives, mutual aid funds, and a bunch of other like preceding like ways of gathering and galvanizing community and organizing for funds or for actions or for the combination of the two. They sort of disrespected the fact that we have this long history of self-organizing. And so like we're saying, oh, DAOs are the future. And so I think it was overrated in that context because it really downplayed a lot of the hard work that many of our preceding people have put together.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that. Izzy?
Well, thank you. I'm Izzy. I'm a musician, music educator, and I'm on the curatorial team at Refraction. I'm also the curatorial grants or creative grants lead at Refraction. Underrated or overrated? I have to agree with all of the points Sirsu brought up. I think underrated as a coordination tool, overrated in the sense that like a lot of the history around co-ops, squats, and collectives kind of gets like erased, the Web 2 organizing that's happened. But overall underrated. Yeah.
Cool. And last but not least, Elijah.
Hi, I'm Elijah. I'm from East London. I guess like my background's in DJing, writing, and my day job is like as an artist manager. Kind of spend a lot of time in clubs, and yeah, I've got to meet people from all around the world. I guess DAOs for me are like underrated. It kind of a lot of communities that I come from are not engaging with them yet, and I'm excited to see what happens when people bring some of the communities that they have offline, online, and kind of broadly connect with other people doing similar things globally. I think the internet has done that to a degree, but giving people a home away from socials would be like the stronger we can get that, the better.
Cool. So the first question I have here that I want to start off with Andrea is, community in Web3 often gets treated like a commodity, right? And She Said So has global chapters and membership in the tens of thousands. So I'm curious, how do you define community and why was it important for you specifically to cultivate one?
That's a great way to start off, because I was thinking about it the other day. I'm gonna go way back to my university days, because I always felt that I went to university and wasted my time there. I studied media and communications, a degree that doesn't really take you too far. But I then remember that my final dissertation was actually on the concept of collaborative work and the power of communities. At the time, TED was just kind of like becoming this big platform where you can, learn really cool stuff that you wouldn't be able to get in university or, traditional education. And I was like, oh, wow, this is like literally just generated by the people, right? For the people. This is a really interesting concept. So that's where I originally got inspired by to create She Said So. Then I was mostly spending a lot of time in tech. I was pursuing a career in tech, and somehow I ended up with Mixcloud, a music tech startup at the time. I was employee number 5. I was really close to the founders and started diving deeper into the music industry, which obviously is a very community, relationship-based kind of environment, and a very collaborative one as well. There's a village behind each artist, behind each release. But obviously I noticed that there were some things that were wrong with it in terms of inclusion and representation. So I decided to do something about it, inspired by a tech community called Ada's List that I was a part of at the time, because I noticed that tech was talking about this thing called diversity, but the music business was, no, that's not something we care about as long as it doesn't drive profit sharing up. So I was always inspired by tech tools, basically, and I created this community inside of a Google group. It still exists inside of a Google group, and multiple other platforms in terms of our local chapters around the world. When I first created it, there was nothing like it, apart from maybe one US organization that was a nonprofit, and it was a bit clunky and old and wasn't really relevant anymore. So we came in. I was living in London at the time, so She Said So still has a huge presence in the UK and Europe. I lived in London for 7 years, and that's where the community grew really fast. But then obviously the music industry is a global environment, is a global ecosystem. The word spread even further. And then I started having all these people reaching out. Oh, hey, I really believe in what you're doing. I really love the ethos. Men didn't feel aggravated by it. They felt included in this, cis men. They felt included in this movement. They felt like, oh, okay, we're trying to, fix things together. And that was something that was very important for me to communicate from the get-go, that we're here to create alliances and partnerships and, collaborations between all genders, really. But first, we need us women to get together as a group and sense check each other, make sure we're not crazy. This is actually something that all women are experiencing, help each other out, create a bigger voice, and then, show the world that, hey, we need to be listened to, just hear us out. And as the community grew beyond the word of mouth level over the next, 3 years or so, we didn't have a website, we didn't have a brand identity, social media. It was literally just that Google group. Obviously, as we scaled and all these local chapters popped up with their own sort of platforms, it became more and more difficult to maintain this sort of consistent ethos and the way in which we manifested that ethos. I think it's still there. If people hear about She Said So through conversations, I think that sort of those values are still carried there. But in terms of operations, how we manifest, how we operate together to collaborate on, curating playlists and curating events and all of that, it's a mess, I tell you. It's hugely difficult. And that's why, you know, I'm at this place where I'm exploring Web3 solutions, because there's nothing in Web2 that is able to help us out, you know. And so for me, to go back to your original question, community means people coming together with shared interests and shared commitment. Because at the beginning, there was a lot of shared interests, and, you know, people asking for things. And it was important for us to introduce this community rule that you first have to give something before you ask for something, you know, and that you maintain your commitment to the community as much as you take from it. How you track that and how you manage that and ensure that it's the case and you reward participation, you know, the way we've done that so far has been very analog and very imperfect. So I'm excited to explore these new tools available to us.
Sirsu, you touched on this, and I think Elijah did as well. So for folks like Andrea and the communities that Elijah mentioned that are sort of like not yet tapped in or just curious or just getting started, you've been around the block a bit. I'm curious if you could speak to the ways in which you've seen organic or more naturally formed communities kind of falter as they step into Web3, and the ways in which that kind of Web3 systems can sometimes trip you up or cause things to kind of go awry because there's edges that are difficult to understand if you're not kind of hip to what's going on.
Oh man, that's a great question. Yeah, so I think the one thing that a lot of folks, one of the first things that trips people up is that, and this is just not just like Web3 and DAOs, but this is just, I think, like the nature of crypto in general, is that it's not a passive place. Like, this requires a lot of real, like, active participation a lot of the time. It should still be healthy though. It's not like you need to spend every waking hour doing this, but because things start with you, and like the aspect of the permissionless like models that we're all kind of dealing with, everything's opt-in, right? Like, or more so, I guess the better way to say is it's like everything asks you if it's okay to do something. Like, so without your wallet or without your key or like the means of you like engaging with this space, nothing happens with you in it, right? So you have to, so you're almost in a way like at the center of your own universe or gravity as it relates to Web3. So is everyone else. And so like, how do you take like something that is so I guess centered around your individual agency and pair it up with other people's ideas of agency to create something larger than yourself? And it requires all of you to be really, really dedicated to the cause of getting over the hump, right? Because nothing in this space right now is very easy or immediate, except for the gratification of you send something to a wallet, you automatically receive it, right? So it's real good at hitting that dopamine on that aspect of it, but everything else still requires human work, which is often the hardest thing to do, and you can't hack it. But if you have shared and aligned incentives to say, hey, let us all use these like tools, this ecosystem, this environment, because we see how like after we've laid the groundwork that it can start to flourish in ways that we couldn't have had like dreamed of before, then that's what really catalyzes that type of like really unique growth that you see in certain communities. For example, like FWB, right? Like it started as like a small group of people just kind of sharing and like keeping in touch with each other in Discord, and it ended up turning into, let's start inviting really cool and amazing like dope people that are curious about this space and are willing to try it and see how it organically grows into something larger. And now it's like one of like the best like socially engineered spaces within Web3. But I think the first thing that trips people up is not really understanding that it's more than empowerment in this space. It's all about capturing your agency and actually having it work for you, or work for you in that sense. I think the second thing is like Web3 inherently is financialized, right? Like everything is a transaction, whether that is real currency or social currency, cultural currency. Somebody is exchanging something for something else. And many people, in many ways, if you don't have the right guardrails around what your project, what your community is representative of, then it leaves room for folks to sort of interpret that for you or interpret that for that community. And sometimes you can create a schism when you have folks that are only really interested in just the potential upside or the speculation of how big that upside might be, or how wide or how vast like your community might penetrate a particular market or set of markets. And so you have to always sort of remind people, listen, this is the intent of why we're here. This is why we are, pushing our funds together. This is why we're communicating, because we see this larger goal. And it's okay if you want to speculate on that, if you're passive, if you're like, I want to help because I see the value in this, but I'm not going to contribute. I think that's okay. But what ends up getting an issue is when things get tough and markets get rocky, then those same people come knocking and saying, well, what have you guys done yet? Like, I put 3 ETH in this when you guys started. I bought another 10 ETH worth of NFTs and everything's like 70% off. What's going on? And it's like, well, I mean, you believed in us, so you gave us the money to invest in what we're doing, but like all good things, it takes time. And so that's the other thing that trips people up too, when folks come knocking and saying, hey, like, where's my piece? You have to have the resolve and the fortitude to say, well, listen, like rewards are comparable in relation to what you put in, but also what you contribute. And if you're a passive player, then you are going to be sort of tied to the way the market is working. And there are certain things that we can do to sort of mitigate that. But at the end of the day, this is bigger than you. So I say like those are like really some of the 2 biggest things that I normally see that create breakdown, both in the early stages of kind of porting existing communities into this new paradigm, but then also folks that have already been native. I think sometimes the financialization hurts the most or hits the most, more so than the collective like agency aspect of it.
Yeah, on that subject, perfect setup for something else I was thinking about, which is a question for Izzy. I'd love for you to maybe talk a little bit more in depth about refraction DAO, what it is. And I'm curious specifically with financialization being kind of a 2-edged sword, do you think that refraction DAO and the work that y'all are doing could exist in a world without crypto? And how are you navigating the challenges that Sirsu just talked about?
That's a really good question. So Refraction is a collective of music artists, visual artists, and I think people who just really generally appreciate culture. I think that maybe to answer your last question first, if I think that it could exist in a world without crypto, yes, I think so. I think that coordinating people who are passionate and share values around music and art and culture is totally possible. I think that coordinating at like this scale, probably not. And I think trying to have incentive mechanisms that make people want to participate and encourage them to like have investment in, for instance, like our creative grants program, like being able to apply to the creative grants program and also like vote on the applications that we receive is not something that's, I think, done in this kind of really distributed way. Like there are obviously like grants programs and voting bodies and awards bodies that do this kind of thing, but not where it's like your community is deciding essentially who's getting funds allocated. And I think it's in a much less like stratified way where I think with so many music and culture organizations, it's the same people who get shine and who get access and resources. It's kind of like a snowball effect. And I think with Refraction, we're really focused on just people who are doing interesting and cool work. And because there's so much less of a focus on like one particular region or one medium, I think we see a lot of different artists that aren't like maybe the people that, you know, within music, for instance, like not the same people over and over again. I also think just in terms of like the way that I think about like Red Bull Music Academy a lot in terms of like what it did for music a couple of years ago in terms of putting people on, like doing really cool festivals, kind of like bridging the gap between like underground and mainstream artists. And there's like probably, to me, I don't know if other people agree, but like a really big vacuum in that space for like curating really, really cool music and art festivals that kind of like make connections for people and really are really well curated and thought through. And it's interesting because a lot of the people in Refraction who like work on the curatorial side, editorial side, like come from like, they're not necessarily like crypto native. Like we have people from like The Lot, we have people from RBMA, we have people from UTech. And I think that like, because of the tools and technology, people are way more reinvigorated to like think about doing festivals and doing curation and doing editorial work, because they're not so focused on like, oh, I have to do some like really lame brand partnership with some like soda company in order to pull this off. It's way more about the people who are involved, and everyone is aligned around what matters, prioritizing artists, thinking about like fair compensation, like, you know, being able to like really kind of like handhold and like walk alongside artists instead of like being extremely exploitative, and thinking about how can we get the most out of somebody. It's really a lot more about thinking through, you know, what's best for Refraction is also like what's best for the artists that we work with. So it was a little bit long-winded, but yeah, I think that what we're doing in some ways could be done in Web 2, but I think because of the landscape, probably not, because a lot of people who do the work have been burned or like lost faith in like legacy systems for doing this kind of stuff. Yeah.
And Elijah, in kind of a similar vein, the communities that you work with, the spaces that you're in, you mentioned that a lot of them aren't yet kind of like plugged into what's going on in this space. I'm curious about why you think that is, and what kind of hurdles need to be gotten over for them to start to experiment.
Yeah, in music, people are still working like in a pop star format. So in campaigns, you know, like releasing albums and then going to send things to press, and my manager's going to do this, and agent. They're not really thinking about, you know, the ways they can kind of always be on or be part of things, even if they're at a certain level. So you have this kind of weird bottleneck that happens with people that maybe have put out good work and have been platformed to a level. They kind of get plateaued. They don't know what to do next. They think, oh, maybe I'll do more PR. Maybe I can get onto a website that will give me better press. I'm like, no, you should be joining the things where there's other creatives that you can bounce off and be given as much as you're taking. But I don't think people are seeing it in that way most of the time. So you kind of have this weird dynamic where, say, like someone's releasing an album, and then they'll be like, hey, Elijah, I need a Web3 strategy for this. Like, can I make some NFTs of my album? Like, they don't know what they're talking about or anything like that, but they know that it's a space where there's a lot of artists and creatives, but it's something that's nearly like an afterthought rather than something that they're building into, you know, the way they're creating, or something that they genuinely want to engage in with people. And it's a shame because in that, I guess, that 2-year period where everyone was at home, a lot of people that I know, and I'm sure most of us, have battled with like not being able to kind of concentrate on creating or being part of communities. And now there is this kind of other thing. People just want to be outside. They want to be at festivals, want to be, you know, in the park, and maybe not at the computer so much. So there's some of the best artists I know just won't, I don't know, use Twitter or use a computer for beyond making the tunes. And I guess what I'm trying to do is just be an easy bridge to that. It's like, hey, there's someone doing this good thing, or people not fearing it and making it as part of their day-to-day routine, like how they'll check Instagram, they will, you know, check in on this like thing that's going on, and see another kind of pipeline of artists apart from the people that they might be, you know, sharing festival bills with or sharing club night bills with, because there's so many people that are creating great work, like Izzy said, but maybe not, you know, playing shows or already like being platformed at a level. But in these communities, they're already there making cool work.
Something that kind of just came to mind that actually wasn't kind of what I had prepped, but I'm kind of curious to get your take on it, and maybe Sirsu as well. I've noticed like a lot of artists talking about sort of the pressure that's put on them, especially if they're in major label deals, to like produce massive amounts of content, right? And it's like the work of being an artist is not just the production of the artistry, it's the production of the marketing around it. And to Sirsu's point earlier, a lot of stuff in Web3 does require this like proactive engagement and this ability to like get in the ring and stay in the ring. So I'm curious from your point of view, like, are artists who kind of like move into this space potentially replacing one burden with another? And if not, like what's the real net benefit to them ultimately? Because they still have to do some extra work, right? But what's the potential gain for them there?
I think it's depth to me. Like, I think people have, oh, I've got to make 100 tunes instead of 10. It's like, no, it's like give an opportunity for people to understand the one tune or the, 2 or 3 tunes that you're working on at a level that you might not do on Instagram or TikTok. And really like being open to exchange, like, oh, this is maybe what I would have done, or just having a conversation about things. Like a lot of artists I work with, I guess they put out work in a way that isn't conversational. It's like, I'm excited to release my song, you listen, bye. And I think we're all getting so much more out of the exchange and the conversation and going back and forth and changing things and letting people, obviously remix and play around with ideas, maybe take it out of a musical space. There's so much there's literally infinite possibilities when it's brought to the artist. But yeah, usually things aren't framed that way from the beginning, and maybe that's not in their head, but I try and push people to let the art go, and let it, play around in spaces that they might not be like familiar or comfortable with yet. Just
one question that I wanted to run by all of you really. So I'll say the question and maybe throw it to one of you. I'm curious how in this space you square the difference between sort of the co-production and co-creation of culture and quality control. In other words, how do you maintain standards in a world where DAOs might be more prevalent, more and more people might be collaborating together for a certain end result? I'm gonna throw it to Sirsu on this one first.
That's a great question. I think for me, it's like, I approach it the same way I approach work, art, or just general life, right? Like I know when people, excuse me, when they saw NFTs, a lot of people were like, oh, most of NFTs are garbage. And it's like, well, I mean, that's kind of to be expected, right? Like before any of us become good at what we do a lot of things wrong at first. We do a lot of things that like we may not like, that we like, but it's not quite where we want it to be, right? And so there's always going to be like this aspect of, I don't necessarily use the word waste, but like just this output that we generate that gets us closer and closer to our goal. Like if we all had the ability to do it like the exact way that we wanted to, as perfect as we could the first time, I think we would have a completely different world that we'd be living in, but we don't. Like we're formed off of the mistakes that we make, and mistakes that are done publicly, at least in this kind of forum, allows other people to collectively find ways to help solve issues so that you can make a better choice in the future. And then also that can create a ripple effect for other people to make better choices. It doesn't necessarily always work like that, but that's sort of like me being optimistic. But I think like the best way to engage, or to at least try to formulate quality, is always having a North Star. Like what's the thing, or what are the aspects that are guiding you along your process? And do you have, if we're talking about DAOs, for instance, like are your core contributors, your main community, also aligned in that? Because as you're all collectively figuring out what looks good or what's good to put out, then you can look at that North Star as your guide and say, well, is it hitting these things? And I think at a certain point in time, you even interrogate what the North Star is, because maybe you've hit that point and now you need to go somewhere else. Maybe you've decided that we've tried this aspect and it doesn't necessarily work, so we need to figure out something else, right? But it's always about having constant communication and developing alignment on where to move. And sometimes I'll even say this too, which is kind of counter to DAOs, but not really, that you don't need to rely on everyone to make a decision at all, like all the time, right? Like there are certain things that like require you to make a very snap decision, and you should feel, again, that agency to do so and be okay, because the community can back you, right? It's not necessarily just going and doing a round robin and asking every single person, are you okay with this decision? Are you okay with this decision? But knowing that like everyone is aligned, at least more in the meta context of what your overall mission is, that you have the freedom and the space to execute as you need to, or as other people may need to. So.
Andrea, same question. How do you maintain the vision for She Said So as you start to wade into the world of Web3 with it?
Yeah, I mean, I already kind of hinted at the fact that, you know, our community is pretty big at this point, and as the more you scale, the more difficult it is to keep those things in check within a Web2 kind of ecosystem, especially. And so for us, there are two layers of, I guess, curation. On one hand, we do curate our community to welcome people who share the same values with us. So for example, if you're a white cis woman and you want to join She Said So, you must demonstrate in some way that you understand intersectionality and that you come into this community with that understanding and you're navigating it, right? And you're occupying space in that way, very mindfully. Or yeah, if you're, you know, if like me, I'm a white woman, cis white woman, but I'm from Romania, Eastern Europe, you know, as a result of that, I think I have different sensibilities towards other people's struggles. And so that's pretty easy to do at the beginning, right? There are more or less different ways in which you can kind of introduce questions through the application process that help you identify that. We have, you know, we also created resources like our own intersectionality style guide, for example, that we like push to people from the very beginning as they're trying to join our community, for them to understand, oh, I need to like spend 15, 20 minutes, you know, applying to become a member. I don't just have to like pay for it, you know, buy my way into, but I have to spend a lot of time digesting all this information and like, you know, presenting myself to them. And so some people quit, like some people just don't even go through that process because they don't want to, you know, make the effort. And those aren't the people that we want in our community. But most people do make the effort. And then the second layer of curation for us is, you know, ultimately we are a community of music industry professionals, creators, artists, and so on. And there's a ton of music out there, and it's hard to make good music, right? It's hard to make good shit that you put out into the world. And most amazing things tend to have a ton of people behind them, right? Again, an example of how collaboration works best. So at that layer, that's where things get quite difficult within the Web2 space, because we want to be a community that's accessible to all, that promotes, you know, everyone as someone with potential. But at the same time, when it comes to creating music or putting out music projects, ultimately the ones that are, you know, better quality, whatever that means to different people, will ultimately emerge, at least in our community. In the real outside music industry world, things are still a little bit different, right? And so how do you manage that? How do you curate, you know, in a democratic way where the entire community is participating in that curation without having the Web3 tools? That's where I'm getting a little stuck. You know, that's where it's still a bit more centralized, our community, from a curation perspective. Ultimately, you know, everything does get to me and the various other people who are part of my core team, and ultimately we make that decision. And the way that those options trickle down to us, again, it's a very opaque kind of process, and I really wanted to make as transparent as possible so that we can truly give the chance to anyone in the community, even if they're in like a small village in Romania, they barely have internet access. But if their art is really amazing, they don't need to have a huge network and huge social media following. They have She Said So, you know, they have a place where they can put their art out, and there's a better chance for them at it being seen.
Izzy, it's 10 years from now. The floor on all refraction NFTs is like 500 ETH, and ETH is at 10,000. How do you maintain a curatorial edge at that point when something pops off in the space, and a lot of times its cultural value is somewhat intrinsically tied to its financial value?
Wow, that is a really hard question. I think that going back to going back to like thinking about art, and art is subjective, and like the value that we place on it is like subjective, whether it's like because of like the way that we appreciate its aesthetics, or because of the fact that we're really driven by the financialization of it and the upside on, you know, buying something and making money on it. But I think having a values aligned team and values aligned community that has like a shared understanding, whether it's through like SOPs, like standard operating procedures, or a manifesto, or a way or framework to think about what matters and why it matters, can, you know, like other folks have said, like serve as a north star, because it's kind of the same thing when, you know, things go up and when things go down. It's like it really shakes how people think about value and what matters. So I think having something to return to that's like shared language, shared documentation, shared values, that can serve as like the grounding point, whether something is up or down, would make sense to me. And I also think there's room for expertise, always, you know, like just because everyone is in this, you know, in a DAO together, doesn't mean that like someone's actual experience and expertise in curation or producing or whatever, like should just become, you know, distributed to everyone. It's like, I think we can trust people who have expertise in an area and lean on them when maybe like it's not the best decision for like a, you know, to ask every single member or to put it to like a vote. I think there's definitely room for expertise.
Just to drill into that a little bit further, I'm curious, like, because you have people with strong backgrounds and like name brand experience, have there been situations where even at that level, there've been like clashes of personality or different POVs on who deserves a look from an event or not, and how those things get handled?
I don't know if there's been like necessarily like clashing, but I think there's been like maybe, you know, definitely different point of views about like who to book for something or like why. But I think ultimately everyone trusts each other enough, and I think maybe that's like the grounding point, that like ultimately if someone feels really strongly about a decision, and it's in their area of expertise, like everyone is aligned enough to trust that person to make a decision. I mean, none of this is like life or death, like booking someone for a show. So I think a lot of it does come down to trust and a lot of conversation, honestly. Like I think a lot of things just get like worked out in like long dialogues when we have like curatorial team meetings around like, okay, like what do we want to accomplish for this festival? Like what is the sound we're looking for? Like who's within our community that might make sense? So a lot of it just gets like hashed out in conversation in a really like not like snapshot voting way, but just like real communication between people. Yeah.
Cool. And Elijah, I'm curious, like for, again, the artists that you care about, the community that you work within, I think a lot about how like technology has been always this like core component and driver of like the success and flourishing of a lot of artists in like the grime and UK drill space. I'm curious then, like what would success look like for the artists that you work with as they like enter the Web3 space? Like what do you want to see kind of the legacy become over the next few years?
That is a hard question. I think more of us has been technically savvy and not fearing like information, not fearing learning new things, not being intimidated by a lot of like the jargon that you're kind of like beaten over the head with as you enter the space. So much of the language and kind of direction comes from like the US. So like here in the UK, like we've just got different like politics, different problems, different ways of looking at things. And I want people to, just to feel like a kind of confidence. And to be honest, like just following on what everyone's saying about creating stuff, it's not the real win, but one of the wins and kind of things I get people to focus on is like, did you have fun making this? Are we all having fun here? Like when we're doing the DAOs and putting together these crews and teams and labels and parties, whatever we're doing, it's like, this is supposed to be fun. And I guess the moment it gets too analytical, technical, number goes up, number goes down. It's like, that's not what any of us got into this for. So, the creative, being fun to make, fun to share, like fun to exchange, like that being like the driving core of, what we do. Like my background is in pirate radio, and the MCs won't say this, but I'm sure like they loved turning up to MC pirate radio. It may not describe it that way, but why would they keep going back every week to just MC for free? Is because they loved it. Obviously, they thought it could get them somewhere and boost their name, but there was like a deep love for creating, and this space will test that for you. Your love of creating and curation and all the kind of language and things that you have to go through to get there. But if that can enable more and creating things that might not have been created without these mechanisms, then I think that's a strong thing for the next 5-10 years. Like creating things that would have never existed. Obviously, tunes, the man are always going to make tunes, but I don't know, like connecting with other people, other communities might not happen.
Amazing. Similar question to you, Sirsu. Like, coming from a design background, working in the gaming space, etc. Like, what's the end game for you and kind of your involvement in the Web3 space? What do you want to see flourish?
For me, I just want people to be true holders of their own path, right? Like for my goal is, if I can get one person to understand that things in life happen because they are walking in the direction for things to happen, that they're the co-creator of the life that they live, that they lead, and they can take that and like charge like their own creativity, their own lives, whatever it is that they want to do. And if Web3 is the catalyst for that, if I can get one person to feel that, then that can be a ripple for other people. I could tell you, as a designer, I worked in ad agency, I've worked in consumer products, healthcare, you name it. I was in every industry, at least, for over a 10-year span. And I never really felt like there was anything that was capturing me enough to go like that extra mile and like really embodied what I felt design could do as a catalyst or a tool for empowerment and agency, until I found like the Web3 space. And since being a part of it and helping push artists through the Mint Fund, or being able to help gamers figure out that they can monetize their likeness in very unique and amazing ways with the power and tools of Web3, or to even inspire the aspects of what it means to be competitive or to engage in competition. I think all these things are endeavors that really help people discover themselves through this work. And if so, allows them to live and lead healthier and better lives, whether both hopefully financially and also creatively too. So, that's really my end game, is to just get as many people on board with that as possible. Everything else is an added effect.
Cool. We've only got a couple of minutes left. So Izzy, Andrea, any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
I'm just excited, honestly. I know there's a bit of gloom and doom out there, and on the music industry side, there is still a lot of resistance, I have to say, from a lot of people who, are not willing to make the effort. It's scary, it's scammy out there, but I truly think it's the future of everything. The Web3 space will be the new internet, and I'm so excited about all the ways in which we will be able to collaborate, both in terms of culture creation, as well as how we govern ourselves as societies. That is the thing that will probably be a big game changer, and will probably take some time before we get there.
Cool. Well, I'll just take this last minute to thank everyone for participating. Thank everyone for watching. You heard it here first. DAOs, kind of underrated, a little bit overrated because of the VCs. Technology, kind of whack, but cool if you use it right. And if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Thanks, everybody.